Mbonu C, Obiageli, and here goes Pedagogy, where I talk to you about social, political, and economic matters in the form of a 1,000-word essay to grow your mind. Subscribe and keep watching. Of the 195 countries in our world, one of them produces over 70% of the global cobalt, the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC. Presently, due to the energy transition and the consequent surge in electric vehicles, cobalt is one of the most demanded minerals globally. Just so you know, your phones, laptops, the airbags of your automobile, most of your consumer electronics, and that least expected belonging you have contain cobalt. Yet, with an actual global price of $33,700 per ton, DRC's economic outlook does not reflect her comparative advantage over this resource as the host of the world's largest cobalt reserve. The question then is why? Well, today, as cobalt whose color is blue, I am also dressed in blue to analyze the dynamic connections of this coveted resource under 4 sections: demand, production, supply chain, and future outlook. Straight into demand. So why is global cobalt demand growing? The transport sector contributes 20% of global carbon emissions, with road passenger vehicles contributing 4 to 5% of that total. Therefore, it makes sense that moving from the high carbon intensity internal combustion engine ICE to the less polluting electric vehicles would help reduce global emissions. Hence, the near recent increase in the demand for cobalt is driven primarily by the increase in demand for electric vehicles. These electric vehicles contain lithium-ion batteries, and these batteries contain cobalt in their cathodes. With decreasing costs, better performance, and higher energy intensity, lithium-ion batteries are dominating other battery emerging technologies in the field. There are projections that starting 2035, EVs will make up half of the new cars sold globally. This is because of government policies, incentives, and subsidies for cleaner energy, as well as consumer preferences for cleaner cars. So, cobalt demand is projected to keep increasing in the medium term. Moving on to production. A consumer country is at the mercy of producer countries, but how does one explain a producer country that is at the mercy of consumer nations? That is the paradox of DRC. Cobalt mining in the country is divided between the artisanal small-scale production, which contributes about 10 to 20% of the total supply, and the formal large-scale miners. But with a complex regulatory landscape, both the artisanal mined cobalt and the large-scale cobalt make it to the international markets. And artisanal mining often involves child labor. In 2019, anecdotal evidence revealed that Apple, Google, Dell, Microsoft, and Tesla were involved in the exploitation of child miners in the DRC to source cobalt, as reports of children as young as 5 were reported dead from child labor. It appears to me the beast of burden is still the beast. The outrage has inspired the need for DRC-free cobalt, or at least to remain socially compliant. The traceability of the source of DRC cobalt has become a critical requirement to avoid child labor. Whichever way you choose to look at it, nobody truly wins. This means that the need to get small-scale miners up the value chain instead of engaging with them for safer practices has led to more conflict, poverty, and political instability. Their sources of livelihood is reaped, and it is a lose-lose situation. So, it is safe to say that whilst our collective climate consciousness is driving the production of cobalt, it is also fueling conflict within the owners. Now let us dissect the supply chains. If one observes from the outside, it is easy to ascribe this to the resource cost that has plagued so many resource-rich nations, but I beg to differ. This analysis is not complete without delineating cobalt under 2 key forms: mined cobalt, that is the raw material, and refined cobalt, that is the more valuable finished cobalt product needed by end users, that is your automakers, technology companies, and battery manufacturers. At this point, the Red Dragons enter the game, the People's Republic of China. Known as the undisputed factory of the world, China refines 75% of the global cobalt and owns 8 out of the 14 largest mines in DRC, thereby controlling 60% of the nation's cobalt production. Through the infrastructure for mineral deals signed between the 2 countries in a much criticized barter system, China pledged $3 billion in infrastructural developments in DRC in return for mining access valued at some $93 billion. Presently, of the $3 billion pledged for infrastructural projects in DRC, auditors have reported that only $822 million, less than $1 billion actually, have been spent since 2008, since the Sycophant agreement, thereby woefully failing to deliver its part of the deal. So while DRC owns most of the global cobalt, a lack of infrastructure and weak regulation have equivocally transferred the expected global influence and accompanying market dominance to China, which now controls about 85% of the global cobalt supply. In other words, the supply chain mirrors the pyramid of a food chain, where DRC, who owns the mineral and is the producer, sits at the bottom, whilst China, who refines it, sits at the top as an apex predator. Renegotiations have yielded no results because anyone can literally bully Africans economically and get away with it. And what sort of politicians and technocrats sign such a deal? Yet typical of Chinese engagement in Africa, safety and ethical standards are elusive, contract negotiations opaque, and source transparency ambiguous. Therefore, the global cobalt market seeks to clean up the cobalt supply chain because of China. Yet, when China falls off the global cobalt supply chain, there will be DRC falling right behind it. Now, onto future outlook. As they say that necessity is the mother of invention, well, I dare say that geopolitics is the forerunner of discovery. The highlighted production shortcomings coupled with Chinese monopoly have sent Western economies into intense research and development into alternatives and substitutes, particularly the solid-state batteries, to move away from cobalt dependence or DRC cobalt dependence. Call it resource diversification or China de-risking. Who knows? But DRC's cobalt can become further devalued if progress is made in these developments, because man makes minerals useful and not the other way around. Nevertheless, the World Bank recommends that DRC's cobalt fate could be reformed by improved source traceability to assure end users that cobalt is responsibly sourced, mine infrastructure development to move into the refined cobalt value chain, and small-scale mining formalization to move from illegal to legal means of production to meet up with health, safety, and environmental standards. But we all know that these would take years, and who's to say that an alternative to cobalt will not be in our batteries by then? And what would happen if I said that Congo should develop hard domestic EV supply chain? Unthinkable?